The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
We got Kickstarter. Let's follow a radio on Detroit. Right behind right on the target right now. I've got a couple right in front of me. I'm going after it. Right, I
got him. Welcome back to the Lead Pursuit Podcast. Tonight, we're going to talk about a Kickstarter product that I just found. Now, normally I like to think of myself as someone who's in touch with the industry, paying attention to what's going on social media, and I think I'd seen a post or two about it, but let me be honest. When I realized there was another game coming out, 8th Air Force and 20th Air Force, that was going to cover the strategic air war side of the bombing campaigns, I was a little surprised. And what did I do? Well, being the sucker that I am, I jumped straight over to Kickstarter and started taking a look at it. I'll let you guys know I've gone ahead and backed it. But tonight, we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk to Robert Phaneuf, the creator of Fortress Games, the guys behind this game for 8th Air Force and 20th Air Force. And we're going to talk to him about what's going on with the Kickstarter, what was the inception of the game, and what's his background. Bob, good to have you on tonight.
Thanks, Doug. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And Brett, we know we've got you out there. We'll talk to you in a little bit when we actually want to hear your opinion, but that's okay. We'll just skip over you for a bit. Bob, give us a little bit about your gaming background. How did you end up getting into wargaming? Were you started on it as a child, or did you come to it later in life?
No, I'll tell you, I got hooked pretty early. I would guess I was around 10 years old when I played that game Kriegspiel. Do you remember that game Kriegspiel?
Thankfully, I actually never played it, but that's all right. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
So you're younger than me. I got it. I got hooked on that game Kriegspiel. I thought it was great. And then my best friend and I actually discovered Panzer Blitz, and that one I'm sure
absolutely
you know well. And that I really got hooked on. So the first game I designed, actually, I was probably 10, 11, 12 years old, and I loved Panzer Blitz so much, I designed this tactical game of island hopping in the Pacific with scenarios for Saipan and Peleliu and Okinawa. And it was cut out of corrugated cardboard, and the faces were taped on. And it was a lot of fun to make. It was a terrible game, but it was my first foray into gaming. And I've loved war games ever since. I got really hooked on Third Reich. And we had a big circle of folks who loved to play it, and then
who must have also been very patient individuals to actually play through that game.
It's a long game. You got to have somebody's parent had to let you set up the game on their dining room table, so it could sit there for a few days. You're absolutely right.
Exactly.
and then finally, I was still doing it when I got to college, and I was designing games in college. Two of them were just big hits. A brigade level game about the Vietnam War, and when I was in college, the war in El Salvador was a very contentious issue in the United States, and I designed a game about the war in El Salvador, and that one in particular sat in the common area of my dorm floor and was always being played by everyone between classes and at night. And we actually me and a group of my college friends considered whether we might form a game publishing company and start with those two games, but back then, before the age of the internet, getting something like that done was very, very difficult. Very difficult.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it was also kind of a mystic art. You didn't know where it came from. You know that you either got this mail order catalog from like Avalon Hill that had all these amazing things you could order out of it that sometimes you bought just based on the title. Or, if you're lucky like me, your parents owned a game store. They had a book and game store. So I kind of was started as an addict early, and you got to walk in and you go, ooh, that looks like the cool new game. But you never really had game designers talking a whole lot unless you went to conventions, and there certainly was no internet forums to go on at that point and say, how the heck do I design a game?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other, the more boring legal aspects of it would have been tremendously difficult. Like, copywriting the games and trademarking the company, all that were very easy for me to do today. 30, 40 years ago, I wouldn't have known where to start. I guess I would have gone to the library or something to try to figure it out. But it would.
What did we all do before LegalZoom?
Exactly. So we sat around dorm rooms talking about getting this game publishing company started, and we just decided the logistics were too overwhelming. So So we went into regular careers.
Yeah, that's a horrible compromise, but I can understand. Okay, so as you had started with board games, it sounds like you pretty much were in traditional wargaming, or at least I say traditional because to me traditional is hard map boards, counter based things like that. Did you ever branch out from there? Did you spend much time with role playing games, or did you stay as pretty much a hardcore board wargamer your whole time?
Pretty much a board war gamer. In fact, even now, the games that I play online tend to be the ones from Steam. The board games that essentially translate to Steam games, which there's a lot of fun ones out there too. But I do like that. I do like that. That strategic level game where you're commanding forces and trying to achieve an outcome, as opposed to say a first or third person shooter and things like that.
Right.
Or role playing like Dungeons and Dragons and type role playing things like that. I kind of like the command a set of historical forces and achieve an outcome in a campaign or a war.
So thinking about that with that level of game, we talked about Third Reich a little bit, and for those who have never even unboxed Third Reich, I recommend you go out to YouTube and look for a Third Reich unboxing, and you'll understand we talk about the complexity of this, because I think it by itself had more counters than maybe 3 other war games combined, and then you obviously combined all the maps and all the information you had to track. What were some of the other big strategic level games that kind of have influenced and inspired you, either good or bad? I mean, what were some of the ones you played and you're like, wow, I'm never going to do it that way?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because obviously, as you might guess, Luftwaffe, the Avalon Hill 1977 game Luftwaffe had an influence on me because I
love it or hate it.
Love it or hate it, exactly. And there were things about it I loved. First of all,
Right.
I think the strategic bombing campaign of Germany is an incredibly rich territory for a game. But there's things about it I hated. I mean, drawing up, I don't know if you remember, you had to actually write up the missions on a pad of paper before each turn and then execute them.
I had forgotten about that. Those are the things I've put out of my mind, not wanting to remember.
Right. So that game had its, I just loved the subject matter, but didn't like how it was done, and always thought it could be done better. I like I think solitaire games are interesting games, which is why the first 2 I'm publishing are solitaire games, because even avid war gamers like all of us, you still play solitaire games. You find yourself, setting up a game at 11 o'clock at night and playing it. And as opposed to making compromises in a multiplayer game to make it work like solitaire, having a game that actually is a real solitaire game designed for solitaire, I think is a more pleasurable experience. I think the Victory Point games, the State of Siege series, are good examples of fun solitaire games. Empires in America and Zulus on the Ramparts are two particular ones that I liked. If for no other reason than it proved they could take that concept, the States of Siege game concept, which I think is a good one, and make it into a strategic campaign, Empires in America, which is the entire French and Indian War, and Zulus on the Ramparts, which is the Battle of Rorke's Drift, a small tactical and relatively small tactical engagement. So the concept worked well for both. So that's a good series. I'll give you an example of a game that should have been, maybe it was just done too early, but you recall the Avalon Hill game D-Day. I thought that was
right.
an incredibly interesting game, or an incredibly interesting concept. The order of battle was meticulously researched, but the game was incredibly dull, right? It's reinforce, move, combat, reinforce, move, combat, and it really didn't have much chrome to it, if you will. So
it almost felt like Tactics 2, but taken to a different level of detail.
That's exactly right.
Very pedantic. Pedantic is the word I would have used for it. And to be honest, I think I was just looking on here on Board Game Geek to see if I'd even logged a play of it, because it had been so many years ago that I even saw it.
Right. Even when I was a kid playing, I thought, boy, there should be more. The term we use is chrome, right, in this industry, but there just should be a little more chrome to this game. I'll tell you 2 games that wouldn't fit on the list we're talking about, but are incredibly influential in the way I approach game design. Monopoly and Risk. So 2 games, obviously we're not going to talk about tonight, but I just want to convey what I think is fascinating about the process behind it. Both of those, if you think about it, are 2 games in one, and that's what gets people hooked, right? Monopoly, the first part of the game is just running around the track trying to purchase properties, right? That's all you're doing is running on the track trying to secure properties. eventually you have a bunch of properties that make sense. And then the second part of the game, which is completely different from the first part, is you're building houses and hotels and trying to bankrupt your opponents. It's a fascinating thing because that hook gets in you when you play the first part because you know that second part's coming. Same thing with Risk, right? We've all played Risk, especially in college, right? With our college buddies, played Risk. Well, same thing. The first part of the game, you're just trying to figure out where you're going to consolidate yourself and get a continent or two, so then you can build up the gigantic armies that continents get you and wipe out your opponents. Well, those games that sink those hooks into you, I love that. I love that. That sink that hook and get you in and then give you something at the end that's really exciting and maybe a little bit different than what you started out with. And that's what I try to do in my games and what I've tried to do in these two games.
You'll see, being a slightly younger than you, maybe, I don't know, probably not, guy, I always think of Supremacy. And I think of, Supremacy as Risk on steroids and how much fun that was to play. Because you get a group of people around the table. And there was more Chrome than Risk, but you really had the option of how much you let it get in the way. And I don't know, I always enjoyed it. I thought that was a fun game that started with a very basic economic and supplies model, and then got, obviously it was you and everyone else negotiating under the table, right, as to how things would happen. And then somebody would nuke everybody else. And, that was the game. But, but it was always fun.
Yep.
Well, so from those games, what led you to say, let me do something about 8th Air Force, or while we're at it, hey, let me do 8th Air Force and 20th Air Force. Let me cover two major bombing campaigns here. How'd you end up there instead of saying, let me bite off something smaller and build a smaller air campaign game?
Yeah. Well, like most, I suspect if you talk to game designers, it's almost always the same. There's an idea that's brewing and brewing and brewing, and you can't quite bring it to fruition. And all of a sudden, there's a moment of epiphany where you realize exactly how to pull it together. And that's how it was for me. It was the 8th Air Force first. I've been literally for years trying to come up with a way to make a great game about the strategic bombing campaign against Germany, and never could quite figure out what the right angle was to get it to really work and really be an awesome game. And then it suddenly hit me how to make that work. And I look at these air campaigns as very much like when you're commanding an air campaign in a game, either of these two games, it's very much like being the coach of a football team. It's just like football. You see the field where it's at. You plan your next play. In this case, the missions you're going to fly. Then you're out of control. You let it rip, and the missions do whatever they're going to do. Hopefully they're successful, but you have to wait until they're done. When they're all done, you sit back and do it all over again. You look at the situation and say, what did I change? Did I advance down the field? Is it time for a running play, or do I got to go for the Hail Mary? And I think we came up with a system in 8th Air Force and 20th Air Force that really captured that mood. You've set up these missions, and then you're just sitting back watching them go and hoping that they accomplish what you wanted to accomplish, and then building on it from there. And the 8th Air Force game was the first one I designed. And as I was putting it together, I kept thinking about what an ignored topic the 20th Air Force campaign in the Pacific was. I mean, first of all, I don't think there's been a strategic air bombing campaign game about the campaign against Germany since Luftwaffe in 1977. There's a lot of tactical ones like Interceptor Ace and others that are very good games.
The Interceptor series there's a lot of little
tactical and
stuff,
single plane. But especially the 20th Air Force, I'm sure there's never been a game about the strategic air bombing campaign of Japan. So I thought these concepts and the way we designed them worked real well for these two campaigns. And when we put them together and play tested them, frankly, they were. I guess I can blow my own horn here because that's why we're here, is to talk about games. They came out much better than frankly even I expected. I was thrilled with how the concepts got executed.
That's awesome. And I was going back and looking. I laugh that I have now become that person that runs Board Game Geek while I'm doing the podcast because there's so many things like, man, I remember those, but those brain cells were a lot of tequila ago.
Yep.
And so like having to go look up D-Day. And as soon as I saw the cover of D-Day, I'm like, okay, I remember playing this. Look through all the parts. And then digging through and remembering some of the old overarching Pacific strategic war games. And you're right, because they didn't break out the air war separately. I mean, yeah, you had counters for aircraft. You bombed air bases. You did interdiction missions. But it was just funny because nothing really compartmentalized out just the air war. And I always wonder if that's some of are historical misunderstanding, that we didn't really necessarily think about it as a complex series of targets to be hit, because everything gets overshadowed by the atomic bomb at the end. But there's decision making that has to be done throughout the entire air campaign against Japan about, okay, am I hitting specific military targets, or am I focusing on industrial or infrastructure, and the kind of things that all go into a strategic bombing campaign.
Absolutely. All the while building towards that. Eventually, hopefully, you'll have the atomic bomb. And the way I built it into the game is research is abstracted through having to hit milestones and goals in order to move your atomic bomb research forward. So if you're failing, and that's somewhat based on, admittedly, it's an abstraction, but certainly if Curtis LeMay and the 20th Air Force hadn't been able to demonstrate that they could successfully wage a massive air campaign against Japan, perhaps the atomic bomb research wouldn't have gone where it went and ended up in the form of a bomb on Tinian. So you have to accomplish things to keep that research going forward. If you're really successful, you might get the bomb a little early. If you're not successful, it might just come in at the last minute. But you've got to finish the game before you've got to win the game before November 1945, because at that point, Operation Olympic is launched and
the ground invasion goes, and you basically have failed to do your purpose.
That's exactly
you've set the conditions, but you haven't finished the war.
That's right.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. And so before we dive into any specific game mechanics discussion, so tell us about the research a little bit, because it's one of the funny things for me, coming from an aviation or military aviation background. There's things that I think of that are innate knowledge to me. And Brett, same way, being a Ranger, there's certain things we just know based on our careers that are kind of funny, that we go, why did anyone have to look that up? How did you not know that's how it's done? What were some of the surprising things you ran across in your research that kind of opened your eyes to strategic bombing, or to little known facets of both the campaigns?
Well, one of the things I learned that I hadn't expected when I started the games was that one of the challenges that both Curtis LeMay and James Doolittle, who commanded the 8th Air Force, Curtis LeMay commanded the 20th Air Force in the Pacific. One of the challenges they both faced and was the constant siphoning off of their forces to complete these peripheral sort of bombing campaign missions. For example, when the air war started against Germany, one of the first things that the Air Force had to do was attack the German submarine pens at Lorient and Brest and along the French coast, because the Battle of the Atlantic was raging at the beginning of 1943. So the last thing, at the time the commander was Ira Eaker, the last thing General Eaker wanted to do was take forces away from what he considered the most important thing, which is bombing German industry, and use them to bomb sub bases, and then river crossings in Western France and across the Seine and the Somme and the Loire. These were big distractions. And Curtis LeMay also, he was very upset at having to take his bomber groups, his incredibly valuable bomber groups, and use them to attack kamikaze bases during the Okinawa campaign. In fact, he had to use groups to conduct a mining campaign. There was a massive sea lane mining campaign that took place by the 20th Air Force against Japan that most people don't even realize happened. Initially, Curtis LeMay's reaction was he didn't want it to have anything to do with it. By the end of the war, he realized it, or early on even, he realized how valuable it was and what a service it was doing, and then supported it. But these were big distractions to them. These guys, both Doolittle and LeMay, wanted to bomb the hell out of enemy cities. That's how they looked at their jobs. And by enemy cities, I mean hit the industries, or in some cases actually just firebomb the cities. But they saw that as their primary mission. So the distractions of the bombing campaigns were an interesting find, and I built them into the game as sort of the first thing you have to think of before you get to choose your targets of choices. You've got bombing campaigns that you're required by higher ups to accomplish some level of success at. It won't consume all your resources.
I was kind of laughing because I'd missed it when I was going through the Kickstarter, but talking about the mining missions and everything right there, and I'm just laughing. I'm like, yep, you do. You have to do whole shallow coast mining missions. So, damn it.
Right. And then another interesting thing about the research was, again, the day and age we live in is a wonderful thing for a game designer because you can find things quickly. You have to obviously be careful of your sources, but you can find things quickly. The funny thing was,
come on, Wikipedia is the perfect source for everything, right?
That's right. If you find it on Wikipedia, it's got to be true. If it came from Google, it has to be true.
Brett, how do we say that these days? How do we preface our Wikipedia comments?
Sources say.
Yeah, sources say. No one says what the source is. Turns out it's Wikipedia.
How sadly true. One thing I'll tell you is it was very difficult, as you maybe would guess, because I look at research as two different types. There's one order of battle research, right? That has to be done well. In my games, they were both at the group level, so I wanted to make sure I got the groups right, and as well as their date of arrival. But most of it was easy to get done, easy to accomplish, easy to get leads and move forward. Finding Japanese Air Force order of battle information on World War II is very difficult. Very difficult. I eventually happened to find one called the Pacific War Online Encyclopedia that was actually a wealth of information. In fact, if anybody out there is ever going to design a game, it has every detail on Army, Navy, Imperial Japanese Army Air Force, units and deployments. It's a gigantic collection, and it ended up being very, very useful. But that was my biggest challenge on the order of battle research. The second part of research, which I think is equally important, so you've got the what, right? What units? The second part is how are those units used and why? And that's where there's no way to do that other than spending a lot of time reading books about the campaigns, because that's the only place to get the nuance of what these commanders were doing and why they were doing it. In fact, I have a few books I'd recommend, if you don't mind me rattling them off very quickly, for anyone who's interested in these campaigns.
Go right ahead, please.
Big Week, a book called Big Week by James Holland, published by Atlantic Monthly Press, is a great resource for really capturing the mood of what the 8th Air Force is going through during those formative months from the Schweinfurt bombing in August 43 until Big Week in March 45. What happened in between those 2 weeks, February 44 rather. What happened between August of 43 Schweinfurt and February of 44 Big Week is a fascinating study on fighter tactics, bombing tactics, the evolution. As I suspect, since everybody here isn't based on the group, everybody here knows something about air power. The 8th Air Force initially thought they could simply send in those bombers unescorted, and these B-17s bristling with machine guns would be more than capable of defending themselves. Well, yeah, they learned during that words. Exactly. They learned during that period as a fallacy. So great book. For the Japanese campaign, a wonderful book by Barrett Tillman, published by Simon & Schuster, is called Whirlwind, as in he who, reaping the whirlwind, as Japan did when they attacked Pearl Harbor. Great book on the strategic bombing campaign by the 20th Air Force on Japan, and then Enola Gay by Gordon Thomas and Max Morgan Witz, published by Open Road Publishing. Fantastic book about the evolution of the atomic bomb all the way to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, with a lot of additional information about the base on Tinian and what that base was like and what life on Tinian was like, and what the rest of the 20th Air Force was doing while the 393rd right. Squadron was getting ready to drop atom bombs. So I think that part of the research is critical. You can get the orders of battle, but if you don't know what the commanders are trying to do with them and what their objectives were, you may lose sight. You may turn out with a game like D-Day.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny as I'm continuing to page through and do some research as we're talking. It's interesting to me that I think people became overwhelmed with the task at hand designing some of these games. And we talk about why did nobody do strategic bombing campaigns? Because there's a lot that goes into those. And when I really go out there and refresh my memory on what was covering the Pacific War, it was always individual carrier actions. It was very discrete battles, where you could, if you weren't playing the entire Victory in the Pacific battle, then you were playing something that was a discrete carrier action or surface action, because then people felt like they could do it justice. I think especially before the days of the internet, when we're having such a hard time doing research because we're with our dusty tomes in a library somewhere. If you didn't have access to other countries' sources, other people's sources, it made it really difficult. I look at some of the games that are out there from the time period when I remember playing these games, and they're just they're either extremely broad, the entire war, or very specific individual actions out there. So I think that'll be interesting to see how you did that in 20th Air Force, and also in 8th Air Force, taking the entirety of the 8th Air Force's bombing campaign. Which, good on you there. Let's discuss how we turn that into a game mechanic. How did you distill something that was such a broad series of targets, geographical areas, into something enjoyable for a game?
Right. So I think. What makes the 8th Air Force game and the actual campaign very interesting is that, as I said, Doolittle and Eaker before him had to accomplish a lot of things in order to get to victory. Obviously, the bombing campaigns we've talked about that were somewhat of a distraction of resources. But in addition, Doolittle had to deal with a massive German aircraft industry that was pumping out aircraft far faster than he could hope to destroy them. So part of the bombing, part of the 8th Air Force's campaign was to make sure those aircraft factories were destroyed. Well, in the game, you're going to have to do that. Otherwise, you're going to have difficulty facing all of the Luftwaffe opposition you're going to face. But that's not how you're going to win the game. The victory points that you're going to have to accomplish to win the game are accomplished by targeting heavy industry targets. So you'll need to hit the oil facilities and the aircraft factories to reduce the Luftwaffe's ability to recover and replace its losses. But they won't win you the game. Ultimately, you're going to have to accomplish enough there that you can then take your bomber groups and start hitting these heavy industry targets. And those are things like Schweinfurt, ball bearing factories, and other things. But the abstraction was you've got three types of strategic targets: aircraft factories, oil facilities, and heavy industry. Only heavy industry gives you victory points, but the aircraft factories and the oil facilities reduce the Luftwaffe's ability to replace its losses. So you've got that duality going on in your head the whole time. Okay, I'm not getting any victory points because I'm hitting these aircraft factories, but I feel like I have to continue because the Luftwaffe is coming up in big numbers. And then the other thing you have to think about is this comes through in that book I referenced, Big Week, the evolution of fighter tactics, where as your forces start building up in 1943 and especially into 1944, your objectives become very much to get into air fights with the Luftwaffe. You want your fighters in air fights with Luftwaffe to take them off the front end. Your bombers take some fighters off, but not nearly as effectively, obviously, as giant masses of fighter groups. So the way the game works there is you're just going to have to at the beginning, except you're watching the German victory point level climb and climb, and it's a bit terrifying to watch that number going up. But okay, I've got to keep an eye on that and keep it a little under control. I'm going to have to periodically put a bunch of my bombers together and hit a target that I'm really not strong enough to hit yet, as the Americans did against Schweinfurt in August 43. They just felt like they had to hit that target. But while you're doing that, it's taking away from your ability to knock out the German aircraft factories and oil facilities and things like that. So that's the abstraction I made that makes, I think, the game exciting. You're eventually going to be able to hit those heavy industry targets. But if you played the game, for example, starting right out of the chute, concentrating all your bombers on heavy industry targets, you'll lose before a third of the game is over.
Nice. Understood. Well, are you going to put out a kind of a gameplay walkthrough? Do you already have one out there on YouTube so people can kind of understand some of the core constructs to these games? Yeah.
So that is one thing I've learned as a new publisher. I think the next games I put out, I'm going to do that. I didn't do that in this time, I guess out of more ignorance than anything else. And the game, of course, is the Kickstarter campaign is finishing on Monday. And we hope to begin fulfillment very quickly thereafter. All the orders for hundreds of games on the shelves have already been put into the printer and fulfillment center. So I hope to be able to fulfill immediately after the fulfillment date. The the one caveat I want to give, and I gave it on the Kickstarter site as well, is the printer we all operate under the restrictions that we operate under in these days of COVID-19, and the printer is highly restricted to what they can do in their state. So I still think we're going to hit that number right on target. He does too, but I got to put out that caveat because one never knows what's going to happen from day to day, especially with the infections jumping up lately. But but
well, and it's people. Hopefully, everyone is fairly understanding these days, especially with Kickstarters, that there's always unknowns out there that you have to juggle. But I think the good thing is at least you've put out what your target date is. I think it's really optimistic. But hey, you know everything that you're going to get done, so you've got a handle on that, and I'm going to trust you on that. And I think it'll be interesting to get the game in people's hands to really get people putting it out there and seeing how the mechanics work out and things. Because I'll tell you, it's sometimes tough for me to go out and pitch into a Kickstarter when I don't see what those gameplay, videos and things like that are. But I'll be honest, that's because I'm spoiled, because we're now, kids of the internet. We bought games years ago that were boxes that we had no idea that even our friends hadn't played. Yeah. Brett's probably that guy. Brett's like, I got into 40K and no one told me it'd be this much fun.
Well, I was just thinking what you said about a video. I don't have the long heritage of board game play like you geeks do, right? But
thanks.
Well, I played a little bit of that Thunderbolt Apache Leader, and the whole time I felt like, man, am I doing this right? I need a proctor or a video tutorial or something, maybe. So
yeah. And the good thing is a lot of them are out there, and so it's that obviously always something to think of for the next round of things you throw through Kickstarter is get those early copies out so somebody can at least walk some of us through the game, so I don't have to open it on day one and go, how do I play this again?
Absolutely. I absolutely will. And like I said, lesson learned. Chalk that up to being new to the publishing industry. But
I'm sure as soon as you put it in people's hands, they're gonna make those videos.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
As soon as you deliver those from the Kickstarter, it's gonna hit, and people are gonna start covering.
What do you think, Bob? You think a guy like me who hasn't played an enormous number of board games could pick it up and run with it?
I think you could, Brett, and I'll tell you why. I wrote the instructions in the manual were written so that you could. My advice at the beginning of the manual is skim over these instructions and then go to set up the game, and then just the instructions are written turn phase by phase by phase of the turn. So all you have to do is, okay, in this phase, here's what I do. Now that doesn't mean you'll be doing the right things, right? So the first time you'll probably get beat pretty soundly, right? But you'll figure out the game mechanics quickly by just going through phase by phase, and it walks you through exactly what you have to do. And I've tried to break the game turns down into simple phases so that you're not overwhelmed by having to do a bunch of complicated things. Each phase is very simple. Do this one thing. Reinforcement phase. You do this one thing. The calendar tells you what groups the Germans get, and you place them accordingly. So tried to make it easy for someone to pick up the game and play it out of the box. And in the designer's notes in the back, I give play advice so that the first time player won't make egregious mistakes. For example, if you're playing 8th Air Force and in the first turn of January 1943, you're attacking German heavy industry targets in the Ruhr, you're dead. You're dead. You're shot down and you're dead and you lost.
Well, I always tell people this about solitaire games is nobody cares if you cheat on a solitaire game. So
right.
if you make a strategically stupid decision and you literally lose the game based on one either misunderstanding of a mechanic or maybe misunderstanding how you had to value targets versus defense layers, that's fine. Take a step back, rebuild to what you thought the last turn was,
right.
And keep going. Because I know I've sometimes hit a hurdle with solitaire games where I get caught up in trying to make the right decision instead of just play through the mechanic. And who cares if you make a wrong decision? You're figuring the game out. You're going to go back and play it for real, another time or two or three later.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Who cares? Cheat horribly. Give yourself the aircraft back. Say that you didn't lose them to the fighters, and proceed through to ingrain the right game mechanics.
I remember when you said that on a previous episode, and I took that to heart when I played the game you gave me, that solitaire game. It helped me enjoy it a lot more because I wasn't stressed out about am I doing it right? I just needed to exercise the mechanics until I kind of figured it out. So it made the first game was just kind of a quick run through. And then the second game, I was probably more doing it right and was having a much better time with it. It was having fun,
Yeah. Yeah. I had to force myself to do it with the original Hornet Leader because I would open up and go, that's not how many aim sevens you carry. That's not how you do this. That's not the purpose. You're not supposed to analyze the game that way. You're supposed to play it, figure out the mechanic, have fun, and move on. So I'm looking forward to getting 8th Air Force and 20th Air Force in hand and seeing how the mechanics work, because I guess I've always wanted to play a solitaire game that modeled an air campaign well. The problem is most of them either aren't solitaire or don't model air campaigns well because they cover everything else and are so complex. So I'm really interested to get the copies and to try them. And you've already said the Kickstarter is going to end on Monday. So hopefully this podcast arrives Friday, which is tomorrow for us, which means Doug will be up editing audio tonight. You're already funded, so that's a good thing. We know this is going to happen. You've hit your goals, but it's still going to go for a couple more days. See how many more you can sell and get people to commit to. So if people want to go out there and if they haven't figured it out, you can go out to Kickstarter.com and search for 8th Air Force, and it will come up. The link will also be in the podcast show notes in there, as well as Fortress Games. What's y'all's website out there? Should be pretty easy to find.
Fortress-games.net.
Awesome. Another person like me that got screwed out of using .com by somebody else.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So, much like leadpursuit.net. Yeah, well, the people who made Falcon 4.0, I don't think they're in business anymore, but someone's holding their domain name. So leadpursuit.com is taken. So yeah, head over to Fortress Games. You guys have links there, obviously, back to the Kickstarter, and people can get involved in it that way. All right. So obviously people can go out and they can pick it up at Kickstarter. Do you have any of them that are set aside for retail? Do you have any game stores that are going to host and sell your game, or has everything pretty much been done through the Kickstarter?
So I've got just a quick note on Kickstarter before I answer that question. I am committed. I want this game experience to be thrilling for everyone who's involved in it. And as you mentioned, Doug, you're one of the ones who pledged. And so I mean that for you too. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is make sure this game's ready to go by Monday. So I actually have funded myself the printing of hundreds of games to be on the shelves. And that's why I'm cautiously optimistic we'll have that done. We put the map boards, the game boards, and the counters, which are take the longest time to print, in place about a week and a half ago, and we got the manuals and the boxes and everything else is in and ready to go. And like I said, I'm happy to pre-fund it because I do want everyone to get the experience as quickly as possible. So I'm ever so hopeful, but the campaign, in any case, the campaign does end on Monday at something like 10 o'clock in the morning, and then I've got an Amazon page all set up to continue the selling of the game as well as additional games that I'm working on. And that Amazon address will be on the Kickstarter page after the Kickstarter campaign finishes and expires. So yeah, we're gonna continue to maintain a good inventory to hopefully fulfill orders quickly. And I'm expecting that the game will do well once it's in people's hands and reviewed. Obviously, we all love our children, right? So hopefully, it's not too much prejudice on my own part. But I do love these. I absolutely love these games, and we'll continue to sell them on Amazon after the campaign expires.
So the only question I wanted to follow on is: so what's next? What's the next game in the hopper post Kickstarter?
So we've got two games that are substantially along, and they're also in the U-Command series, which is what I call these two games, where the solitaire games where you command one side. We're just about ready to release some pre-information. So if I could hold off there, Doug, I would make this promise, since we're doing this podcast. When we're ready to release it, I promise to let you know first.
Outstanding.
But because you were nice enough to have us on this podcast before we go live with Kickstarter, so I promise I will. But it'll be two more games in the U-Command solitaire series, and then we've got an additional game still in concept that will be a two-player game, but will also have rules set up for solitaire play. The one thing I don't like is multiplayer games where you have to make massive compromises to play it as solitaire, right? It doesn't really work. So we've got a great concept game that is, that's got a long way to go. It's nowhere near anything yet, but it's a concept. But we've decided it's going to be both. It's going to have a fully functional solitaire game and then a multiplayer game.
Cool. Well, Trevor, I know you pitched in a little bit late, but thanks for joining us. It's always good to have another Marine on the show so I can outnumber Brett here. Any questions or anything for Bob?
No, I kind of came to this late, so I can contribute absolutely zero to this conversation. No, I just saw it and it looks pretty cool.
We still love you anyway, brother.
Oh, shucks. No, I just think it's a really cool idea. I'm actually in the middle of building a model P-51 from the 8th Air Force, from the Blue-Nosed Bastards, John C. Mayer. So pretty cool idea there. I'm excited to potentially get it, but we'll see. I haven't contributed. I just saw the Kickstarter today, so I don't think I'll have a chance to contribute just yet. But if you have any coming in retail, I would definitely want to jump on that.
You could always be on the Brett plan, which is Doug pitches into the Kickstarter, and then I send you the game because I realize I'm not going to get around to playing it for like another month. So, which reminds me, Brett, I need my copy of Thunderbolt Apache.
I mean, if you happen to give any love to the Marines, just a chance. Like, I know we kind of happen to fly Corsairs against the Japanese later on. I don't know if it's down the pipe or anything, but I wouldn't mind that either.
Yeah. Trevor putting in his request for the follow-on air campaigns.
The recovery base at Iwo Jima comes into play in the 20th Air Force game, so you got the Marines. The Marines count there. So if Doug was a good friend, he'd fire you off that copy of 20th Air Force.
Exactly. I might have to do that because there's definitely no way I'm going to knock through both of them in the next months after they deliver, because I'm going to be too busy moving. And Brett, I don't know what your excuse is, but I think it'll be the same.
I'll trade you painting commission for that.
That sounds like a deal. Now I'll actually have some painted fighters. Awesome. Well, Bob, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I really appreciate it. Brett, anything else you wanted to cover in closing?
No, I appreciate you including me on this because I like learning more about what's out there with the board games. I know I don't have a lot of experience with board games, but I truly did enjoy the one solitaire game I've gotten into, so I'm really interested in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. This should be fun, and Bob, I'm excited to see it when you guys deliver copies from the Kickstarter. So
thanks, Doug. Thanks very much. Thanks, Brett. We're gonna get on that, Doug. We're gonna get on that as quick as we can. So I hope to be one of those people they talk about as being the quick delivery Kickstarter guys instead of the ones you wait forever. We're working awfully hard to get that done. So
absolutely. Well, hey, I
keep your fingers crossed.
We'll also be the merciful podcast guys, and not everybody on day one of expected delivery is like, "Where's my copy of the game?" We know there's delays, so we definitely will keep people informed, and I know you guys will do a good job keeping us informed. So I appreciate that. Well, awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate taking the time for the podcast, and we'll catch up with you all next week.